Lots to talk about today. We're going to start with Purdue. Purdue went on the road to play Michigan State, which is my favorite arena in the Big Ten that's not Mackey Arena or Assembly Hall. I love Michigan State. I love aesthetically. I love watching games there. So I was circling this game for a while, and I got lucky because Purdue and IU both traveled to Michigan State. IU pulled out a win. Purdue did not. They lost 75-66. That means that the Purdue Boilermakers have lost 3 in a row to ranked conference opponents back to back to back. There's a grouping of 4, now kind of 5 teams, with Maryland being included, at the top of the Big Ten. They're all the only ranked teams in the Big Ten, those 5. But really, it felt like the teams that could win the league were Michigan, Purdue, Michigan State, with Wisconsin being on the outside looking in with some sort of an outside shot at it. That's what we were sort of looking at, was Purdue, Michigan State, Michigan, Wisconsin. Purdue got all 3 of those teams. They played all 3 of those teams 3 games in a row and lost all of them. And that's how Purdue goes from being really effectively tied at the top of the Big Ten to out of the conversation to win the regular season title after losing to the 3 other teams at the top all in a row. Michigan State was the last one. They cap off this slide. At least we think they cap off this slide. For all we know, Purdue loses to Indiana on Sunday and makes it a 4-game losing streak. But this is the first time that Purdue has lost 3 times in a row this season. It is arguably the most difficult stretch of games of the season. They're now 11-5, 4th in the Big Ten. They probably don't have a chance at winning the regular season title. There maybe could be some chaos scenarios. We'll talk about that later in the segment. Right now, Purdue's focus really is just maintaining a top 4 seed and maintaining that double bye in the Big Ten tournament. Really, it's just a single bye, technically, but we call it a double bye because they'll skip the first 2 days of the Big Ten tournament. We want to see Purdue stay in that top 4 range. It's kind of baffling at this point in the year that that's the conversation we're having, that we need to sort of talk about the fact that Purdue needs to stay afloat at the top of the Big Ten rather than competing for a title. But regardless, Purdue lost to Michigan State, and there were 2 main issues in the loss in the game, right? The losing this game, there was really 2 things that stuck out to me for why that happened. And then I want to talk about the larger issues at hand, because there's 2 major holes and 2 major flaws that Purdue sort of employs this year in men's basketball. It's the difference between past seasons and this current season. It's the difference between last season's team that went to the championship game and this season's team. In the game against Michigan State last night, the biggest issue, anyone who watched the game could probably say it was a rim protection. Purdue doesn't have Zach Edey anymore, right? That's common sense. We know that. It's just Trey Coffin-Rent, and there's been a considerable defensive drop-off. Most of the focus around the conversation this offseason with the departure of Zach Edey to the NBA was on offense, how they're going to have to shift how they play, because forever the offense would just flow through the anchor and Zach Edey, and at the very least you understood that he's down there somewhere, right? As much as that's as a saying in football. Truly the idea that he was down there somewhere, and at least in mind, Zach Edey getting the basketball was one of the primary targets on every single possession. Now you kind of have to shift that because Trey Coffin-Rent doesn't have the ability physically to be as dominant as Zach Edey down low. TKR has been fantastic, no hate to him at all. But regardless, rim protection has been an issue on defense, and that's something that we maybe didn't fully anticipate heading into this year. Michigan State was lobbing up dunks left and right. I should have gone back and counted, because it felt like every possession, if they were scoring in the paint, it was a lob and a dunk, and it got the crowd fired up, rightfully so. And every single time you see Trey Coffin looking up at the hoop, sort of disappointed and in awe, really, at what was happening to him. And this has been a method that top teams in the Big Ten have been using to attack Purdue and to beat Purdue, at least on their own offensive side of the basketball. One thing that Purdue is built on is not necessarily a 2 big man system, but certainly a 2 big man system in terms of the roster, right? Forever. And when I say forever, I mean basically my entire lifetime. There's been this idea that you transition from one big man to the other with at least 1, maybe 2 years of overlap. We went, and I might have the sequencing wrong here, but you'll recognize the names. We had Isaac Haas and Matt Harms at the same time, right? And as Isaac Haas was phasing out to graduation, Matt Harms was garnering some experience. He was not the primary big man, but he was one of them, right? And then Matt Harms, when Isaac Haas leaves, he now steps up and he now has the starting experience and he has the understudy experience. he becomes the starting big man effectively. And then, if I'm not mistaken, Travion Williams is the secondary guy. And then he phases out. Travion Williams becomes the number one man down low. Zach Edey phases in. And so and then Zach Edey transitions into Trey Kaufman-Renn. So there's a seamless transition between big man for Purdue. And that's really, in my opinion, why I looked at the loss of Zach Edey and said, sure, that's going to hurt, but it's not going to hurt that much. Purdue will still be an elite team in the Big Ten because Trey Kaufman-Renn is just going to be that next plug-and-play guy. Maybe he doesn't go to the NBA. He's probably not National Player of the Year candidate like Zach Edey, but Trey Kaufman-Renn certainly still had an opportunity to be spectacular, and he has been spectacular. But what happened in the very beginning of the season? Daniel Jacobson was out for the year. He got injured. That is tragic because he is that understudy. This means two things. One, for the long-term future of Purdue, they lost a year of that understudy existing, right? Or Jacobson, rather, not having him be that understudy decreases his amount of starting experience and experience in games. It also decreases his ability to kind of prepare himself to be the next Trey Kaufman-Renn. Now, that's the long-term issue. In the short term this season, what that means is Trey Kaufman-Renn doesn't have someone next to him. And Caleb Furst hasn't really been, and he's not really supposed to be the presence as a forward to be physically assertive and defend when it gets ugly down low in between the blocks. Trey Kaufman-Renn's really the only player of his player type, of his skill set on this roster, which is fine until it's not. And Michigan plays two big men at the same time a lot. And teams were doing this. Michigan State was doing this. It started in the backcourt where you're attacking Trey Kaufman-Renn. You put two big men on the floor, or you at least position your roster and position your style of offense in a way where you're targeting the blocks because you understand the fact that Trey Kaufman-Renn is all alone down there, and you can lob it in there and dunk it over him because he's not Zach Edey. Athletically, he's not that physically imposing, perhaps. Across the board, he's not that imposing compared to Zach Edey. You can just lob it up and dunk it over Trey Kaufman-Renn because he's all alone down there. And there's not enough physicality down low, and that's partially because we don't have that understudy and Daniel Jacobson to tower over everybody between the blocks. So I throw around the word understudy. I think that's what I'm going to call that underclassmen big men that Purdue has had forever, right? And it transitions. It's a constant flow. Isaac Haas and Matt Harms, they never have to have a situation where they're relying on a freshman big man because there's always somebody above them, right? In terms of age, in terms of experience, whatever. There's always somebody above them to teach, to guide, and at the very least to take the pressure off of them to make that underclassman not necessarily the guy up there or down there, perhaps in between the blocks. They don't have to be the number one player because there's someone older than it is, and that older player is ready because of their years as an understudy. It's this constant flow. It works out perfectly. Trey Kaufman-Renn doesn't have that understudy in Daniel Jacobson. He's all alone. He's getting dominated down low by teams that understand the fact that he is at least one of the weaknesses of the defense. And I shouldn't say that he's a weakness of the defense, but at that area of the floor, I should say it this way. Trey Kaufman-Renn's fantastic, but he's all alone. So that area of the floor in the front court is a weakness of the defense for Purdue because Trey Kaufman-Renn is all alone. So when you see opposing teams like Michigan State now start to figure out that if we target him offensively, we're going to be great. Because Michigan State understands that they're not good from three. They're the worst shooting from the three-point line team in the Big Ten. Heard that on the broadcast. So if that's true, then you understand the fact that they're going to have to shoot well from beneath the arc. And Purdue is horrific at defending shots inside the arc because they don't have that physical presence in Zach Edey to rely on anymore. So they understand the fact that if they attack the blocks and if they attack Trey Kaufman-Renn, they're going to find opportunities. They're going to find space. They're going to find open shots a decent amount of the time because, again, Trey Kaufman-Renn effectively is all alone down there. That was one issue in this game, and that's a harbinger of an issue for the rest of the season is rim protection. And teams that understand how to get downhill, get to the cup, and get around Trey Kaufman-Renn, they're going to be able to if they scheme it up correctly. And that really could be one of Purdue's pitfalls paired with the other issue, which is really, I feel like, a hole on offense, which is the fact that they don't have a second scorer in the backcourt. If their largest hole on defense is the void left by Edey and the fact that they don't have the rim protection to defend themselves at the end of the day, the largest hole on offense is the lack of a second scorer. This is just flat out unfortunate because Matt Painter and this recruiting staff, they did pretty much everything they could to set themselves up for success in this way by recruiting Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer at the same time, right? Braden Smith has emerged to be fantastic. He's one of the best point guards in the country, in my opinion. Fletcher Loyer has not emerged to be that level, and it's not like we needed two elite guards in order to be good. But certainly in order to win a national championship, you'd appreciate having 2 elite guards, or at least 2 guards on the doorstep of elite. To me, Fletcher Loyer in this game was an example of someone that should have been doing more. There was only 2 double-digit scores in this game for Purdue. As you can imagine, it was Trakoff and Wren and Braden Smith. Michigan State had 4 players scoring in double digits, and they had 2 others with 9. So effectively, almost 6 players that were shooting or scoring in the double digits. That is a strength of Michigan State. They spread the ball around very well. They're one of the best assisting teams in the country. And independent from that, they have a lot of guys that can shoot and a lot of guys that can score, and they spread the ball around to those guys effectively. And that's part of the reason why Michigan State is good, is so good is just because of how deep they are and how expansive their scoring opportunities perhaps can be across their roster and into their bench. Purdue, on the other hand, only had TKR and Braden Smith in this situation. We were supposed to see Fletcher Loyer emerge as the second part of this tandem with Braden Smith. He was supposed to be legendary, right? Braden Smith is fantastic. Fletcher Loyer has been underwhelming. He had 8 points in this game. He was shooting 40% from the field. He was 2 for 3 from the three-point line, but still, 8 points on 40% shooting from the field, 2 for 5. He's not taking enough shots as what's supposed to be our number 2 guard in Fletcher Loyer, an experienced guard. He's only scoring 8 points in this game, but again, he took 5 shots from the field, right? That's not what we want to see from Fletcher Loyer. He's supposed to be more than that. That's something we want to see from someone like CJ Cox or Miles Colvin or Jakari Harris even. Somebody that maybe can put themselves in a position to stand in the corner, put up a couple pop-up threes, right? Find a few shots here and there, come out of the game, come back in to be some fresh legs and add a new method of intrigue, I suppose, to the game from a roster composition standpoint. But Loyer hasn't been a premier shooter that can hit the clutch shot when necessary, and he's not even really someone to be relied on in terms of scoring productively, efficiently, consistently, like Braden Smith has been. I don't necessarily want Fletcher Loyer to be Braden Smith, but it'd be nice if he was at least close from a production standpoint. He hasn't been, and that is another pitfall of this Purdue team, and it's not necessarily Fletcher Loyer's, it probably is Fletcher Loyer's fault, but it's not necessarily to the fault of Purdue, because they put themselves in position to have a roster that could have a big man anchor, have 2 or 3 elite guards, and really just play through those strengths. Fletcher Loyer hasn't been that second premier guard, so if Braden Smith is having a bad game like we saw against Wisconsin, Purdue doesn't have anything going for him. It was fortunate that Trakoff and Wren went for 32, but their backcourt is completely lackluster if Braden Smith is not playing well. And even if he is, eventually defenses are going to sort of cater to that, and eventually defenses are going to start to pander to that. They're going to shift their attention towards Braden Smith, and the next thing you know, Braden Smith has to kick it out to the corner. Who's going to hit that 3? Nobody. It hasn't been Fletcher Loyer, and most of these guards are too young to really expect them to hit those shots consistently. We really learned that lesson when Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer were underclassmen. In their freshman and sophomore years in those tournaments, Purdue struggled, and it's partially because their backcourt was super inexperienced, which is totally understandable. But Fletcher Loyer's experienced now, right? This is a Fletcher Loyer that's an upperclassman and ready to potentially have a high level of success at this point in his career, and he honestly hasn't, certainly not even close to the same way Braden Smith has. So those 2 issues for me are what I think are the larger holes. One on defense is rim protection with the loss of Zach Edey, Trakoff, and Wren. The fact that he's all alone is a weakness, and teams are attacking that, and they're scoring in that way. And then on offense, Purdue in some cases can't keep up because Fletcher Loyer, for example, or really just that entire backcourt supporting cast, there isn't someone that can score. There isn't someone that can hit those shots when Braden Smith can't, or when Braden Smith needs an extra guy, right? If you're playing someone like Wisconsin who averages over 80 points a game, there's not someone else to hit those shots. Those are the 2 holes with Purdue right now on a larger scale. Now, in this game, rim protection was the biggest issue. I also thought the turnover battle was a bit concerning. Purdue turned the ball over 12 times. Michigan State only turned the ball over 6. Usually, Michigan State turns the ball over a lot, right? They average 11.3, so that should have been even. I think the turnover margin is a little bit different than this game probably turns out entirely different. It was a 9-point loss for Purdue. Fletcher Loyer's last shot was in garbage time, effectively a buzzer beater at the end. So really in the final 5 seconds, this was a 12-point loss for Purdue, which is concerning. By the way, at the end of the day, I'm being way too hard on this team because this is on the road against a top 15 conference opponent in Michigan State who probably despises you, finally has a team that could potentially win a title under Tom Izzo. I don't really think so, but they're at that level. Second weekend caliber team in Michigan State. And Purdue comes into your building. It's a difficult task, and Purdue's coming off a 2-game losing streak. This game in a vacuum is very understandable. This loss in a vacuum is very understandable. If you just look at the schedule and say, okay, I'm going to spoil one game for you, Purdue's going to lose by 9 on the road against Michigan State. They're going to be ranked number 14. That kind of makes sense. You look at that and you think it's okay. The reason why it's so alarming is because this is the third in a row, right? And again, all these losses are still understandable. At Michigan, understandable for the same reasons, especially because it was only by 2. The Wisconsin loss, even though it was at home, is understandable. These 3 losses in a row is uncharacteristic of Purdue in the last few years. It really shows the difference between this year's Purdue team and last year's Purdue team that really was contending for a title. And this string of losses is really showing me why Purdue is not a championship caliber team, perhaps. I shouldn't have said tournament. A championship caliber team. I don't think Purdue will win a title. I don't think they can. And I think it's partially because, again, rim protection on defense and the lack of a second premier reliable scorer on offense in the backcourt. Fletcher Loyer has to improve, or somebody else has to massively exceed expectations and step up to be that guy, or else Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn we could have more games like this one against Michigan State, where the offense is entirely fueled by Smith and Kaufman-Renn, and defensively Kaufman-Renn is getting bullied down low, and there's just not much Purdue can do to catch up. They kept up for the majority of this game. They put themselves in position late, but Michigan State controlled this game for effectively the entire time, and that made it very difficult for Purdue on the road to come back when they don't have much offense outside of their 2-star players, and their defense is continuously unstable. Moving forward, what worries me is that Purdue could lose to Indiana on Sunday, because that game's at Assembly Hall. Indiana's going to be on 9 days of rest. It's going to be their Super Bowl in Assembly Hall. We're going to preview that game on Friday, which it works out that game's on Sunday because there's more time in between the preview and the actual game. So we'll talk more about that game, of course. It's one of the biggest games on the schedule in college basketball for this show. Purdue at IU on Sunday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern on CBS. We will preview that game, as I said, on Friday. But what worries me is that Purdue might be in position to lose a 4th straight, because Indiana's been close. They were close last time. They've been close against some good teams. They went to Michigan State and won, which is fantastic for them. Indiana, a bubble team, looking to pick up another quad 1 opportunity. It could be a trap spot for Purdue, and that would be a 4th loss in a row, which would be killer for their seeding. It would be killer for their Big Ten standing across the board as we head into the tournament. That game's going to be difficult. After that, they play, again, a string of tournament teams for the most part. They have UCLA and Rutgers inside Mackey Arena. Rutgers won't make the tournament. UCLA probably will. They go to Illinois to close out the regular season, and then we have the Big Ten tournament. Right now, Purdue is the 4 seed, which would mean that they would play one team out of Maryland, Indiana, and Minnesota. Maryland's the 5 at the moment. That's obviously the most likely candidate. Could be Indiana, could be Minnesota. That's who Purdue would be playing in their first game in, what would that be, the quarterfinals, I believe, of the Big Ten tournament? I think that's correct. And, of course, a win would put them against the number 1 team, which at the moment is still Michigan. So Purdue's in the mix. They could still win the conference tournament. They probably can't win the regular season title. They very well could lose in the first game of the Big Ten conference tournament. But regardless, Purdue moving forward has a few opportunities to really ramp up some momentum, right? They just had their toughest stretch of the conference schedule. Their honestly toughest stretch of the schedule as a whole entirely, with Michigan, Wisconsin, at Michigan State. Lost all 3. Now it's time to regroup. Got a few days of rest before IU. Season sweep IU, and then ramp up against some lower level tournament teams in UCLA and Illinois, and I suppose the Rutgers game counts too, before you get to the Big Ten tournament. Use the Big Ten tournament, again, to ramp yourselves up in terms of momentum into the NCAA tournament, and then we'll see how far this Purdue team can go once they're there. But this loss to Michigan State proves to me that Purdue's probably not a championship caliber team. Unfortunately, I hate to say that. I love Purdue, lifelong Purdue fan. I guess I'm wearing an IU sweater, but lifelong Purdue fan. I love Purdue. Been wanting to see them win a national championship for my entire life. They never have. Got very close last year, but again, couldn't make it happen. This loss to Michigan State really is not very encouraging to me. It really makes me feel like Purdue can't win a championship. I look forward to being proven wrong, but now it's time to reset ahead of the IU game. But rim protection and lack of a premier second scorer are the 2 issues and the 2 holes and flaws in this Purdue team. And that concerns me moving forward, and certainly was a concern in the game against Michigan State last night.